Here, watch a clip from the court TV. It was actually done by video, this hearing, so you can see who's who on the screen. Watch this first video. You can see the judge with his mask on. The lady in her home in the top left is the court reporter working from home, I think. She seems to have a very lovely home. I don't think she's been missing any paychecks. And Shelley Luther, the salon owner, she's not in the witness box in the top right because, I don't know, probably it's too close to His Holiness, the judge. He'd get germs from her. So she's sitting down in the box on the bottom left. Anyways, listen to this.
That you now see the error of your ways and understand that the society cannot function where one's own belief in a concept of liberty permits you to flaunt your disdain for the rulings of duly elected officials. That you owe an apology to the elected officials whom you disrespected by flagrantly ignoring and in one case defiling their orders, which you now know obviously apply to you. That you understand that the proper way in which in an ordered society to engage concerns which you may have had is to hire a lawyer and advocate for change, an exception or an amendment to laws that you find offensive. That you publicly state that this is the way that citizens in the state should behave. And that you represent to this court that you will today cease operation of your salon and not reopen until after further orders of the government permit you to do so. This court will consider the payment of a fine in lieu of the incarceration which you've demonstrated that you have so clearly earned. Is there anything that you would like to say?
Now, I understand the point. Either we in Canada and our American friends and the Brits, either we're countries of laws or we're not. We can't each pick and choose which laws we follow. There's something to that. But that's not really what he said or did, was it? He said her freedom, the difference between her going home or going to prison, was based on her denouncing herself as immoral and praising the political class as moral. I'm sorry, that's not a law. That's not the rule of law. That's not law and order. That's not the rule. He just made that up. Was the offense that she opened her store or that she wasn't obedient to her superiors, of which the judge clearly regards himself as one? Oh, and I love that. Hey, you're teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Your staff are begging you to get some work. Well, just hire a lawyer and lobby the government for change or file a lawsuit. Maybe in 6 months or a year or two, you'll get a court hearing when the courts open up again finally, and we'll talk about all this then, okay? Yeah. Well, Shelley stood up to reply. You can see her in this next video standing up in the box on the bottom left. She's very respectful, very polite, calls the judge sir many times, and says what was actually motivating her, not selfishness, but feeding the children of her staff. They're starving, she says. Take a listen.
Judge, I would like to say that I have much respect for this court and laws. And that I've never been in this position before. And it's not some place that I want to be. But I have to disagree with you, sir, when you say that I'm selfish, because feeding my kids is not selfish. I have hairstylists that are going hungry because they'd rather feed their kids. So, sir, if you think the law is more important than kids getting fed, then please go ahead with your decision, but I am not going to shut the salon.
So literally off to prison for a week. In prison, 7-day prison sentence plus $500 a day in fines. I tell you, I wouldn't have been that polite to the judge. Then again, I'd probably have been sentenced to a month in solitary confinement for making a joke about the judge. Sure, you don't need a hair salon, Kojak. I might have said something dumb like that. I'm not as polite as Shelley Luther. America's funny. Different branches of the government aren't afraid to criticize each other, though. And unlike here in Canada, politicians aren't afraid to criticize judges in particular, especially extremist judges like this one. Now, in Canada, we have extremist judges, too, making extremist rulings all the time. Can you even remember once when a politician called out a judge? Well, look at this by no one less than the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton. I find it outrageous and out of touch that during this national pandemic, a judge in a county that actually released hardened criminals for fear of contracting COVID-19 would jail a mother for operating her hair salon in an attempt to put food on her family's table. The trial judge did not need to lock up Shelley Luther. His order is a shameful abuse of judicial discretion, which seems like another political stunt in Dallas. He should release Ms. Luther immediately. All right. Apparently this same county released 1,000 hardened criminals, so at least they'll have room in prison for Shelley Luther. Ken Paxton, the Attorney General there, he's a Republican, and so is the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott. I think he's a pretty great governor, but it was his law that was applied by the judge here, so what does that say about him? What does he have to say about that? Well, scratch that. Who cares what any of these politicians say? Who cares what the Attorney General says? Boy, it sure was nice of Ken Paxton to put out a tweet, a virtue signaling tweet, that showed how much he cared. Shelley Luther was still in prison, though. Well, I looked up the Texas Constitution, Section 411B. In all criminal cases, except treason and impeachment, the governor shall have power either after conviction or successful completion of a term of deferred adjudication, community supervision, on the written signed recommendation and advice of the Board of Pardons and Paroles or a majority thereof. It's a rambling way of saying, if I read that right, the governor can pardon Shelley Luther. He just needs to get a majority of the Board of Pardons and Paroles to sign a recommendation. Great. Get on the phone with him. Have a 5-minute conference call. Sign the piece of paper. Get Shelley Luther out of prison. Now, just before I walked in to record this video, I saw some breaking news. The governor had weighed in personally, not with a pardon, but with a blanket removal of jail as a penalty for violating any of his health orders. Let me read this from Greg Abbott. Throwing Texans in jail whose businesses shut down through no fault of their own is wrong. I'm eliminating jail for violating an order, retroactive to April 2, superseding local orders. Criminals shouldn't be released to prevent COVID-19, just to put business owners in their place. All right. Now that looks good, but it would, take an expert in Texas law, which I am not, to let me know if this would work, because I understand that Shelley Luther was sentenced for contempt of court. You saw the judge, because she wouldn't say what the judge told her to say. She wouldn't call herself selfish. She wouldn't praise politicians. The whole thing's nuts. So will the governor's retroactive rule have anything to do with this order for what I think was a contempt of court order? Now, just one more thing. I just walked in and I got another update this afternoon. Apparently the Texas Supreme Court literally ordered that Shelley should be released, and then there's another court date in the future to talk about it again, I think. Now, look, there's a lot going on, probably even more happening now that I'm recording in the studio. I love Texas. That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.